Отже, доброго дня і ще раз, шановні
So,
колеги.
good morning and good afternoon, dear colleagues. As we promised, we would have to wait for a couple of minutes, and it's great that we've done this because we are joined by the other colleagues of ours. Thanks very much indeed for everything. Some of the people are still missing, but hopefully they are going to join us whenever they are available. We have the quorum already, and that cannot but please us. Now, a couple words about what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I want to express my sincere gratitude for joining this initiative. My name is Maria Yaroshko. I'm the active project manager of the German-Ukrainian Agri-Political Dialogue. I think you've heard of our project already, and you know that we've been working in Ukraine since 2006, primarily getting involved in issues that have to do with agriculture policy, rural development, and presently in this next project phase that we started in January this year and scheduled is for the next 3 to 4 years to come. This engagement will be dedicated primarily to the agriculture trade policy. So we consider this as it really an addition to what we've done before. This is an expansion to what we traditionally did. And here we can rely on our past experience, because in this bilateral projects between Germany and Ukraine, one of the projects was the agri-trade project. I think many of you were familiar with that one. It was Mr. Andrei Pilling who was in charge, and also there was a separate component, a separate dimension to that project dedicated to agri-trade. And that's the component that Richard Moody was in charge of, who we want to welcome sincerely today in our meeting. And thank you very much, Richard, for supporting this initiative and for your continued effort to help us develop our agri-trade policy for Ukraine. And you've already been an established agri-political dialogue expert. So the consolidation of our project has changed a bit, but the areas that we cover remain to be the same. When talking about why we're here today, I would like to actually tell you, since many of you know what kind of current circumstance the Ukraine is facing today, we're at war at this point of time, and it has adverse impact on all the economic spheres, and not an exception is agriculture and agri-food. Nevertheless, there are a lot of opportunities out there. There are still many tasks in front of us that have never been, so to say, discovered. And this is the homework for us. This is the homework that we need to do in a speedy manner. I think many of you have heard already so many plans of our president and from our government regarding the prompt Ukrainian accession to the European Union. Tentatively, it is expected to take place in 2024. For us, of course, this is a great prospect, isn't it? But we also have to understand at the same time that it brings a lot of challenges as well. The challenges have to do primarily with how we can focus on things that are important for the European integration and the homework that we've done so far. Here, I'd like to thank Mr. Lapa. I can't see him joining us, but I'd like to actually refer to his statement just recently in one of the social media, that he said between 2015 till 2021, a lot has been done to align our Ukrainian legislation, and particularly in sanitary and phytosanitary norms and rules. We've done our homework probably at 50 to 60% only. I want to remind you once again that it's between 2015 till 2021. And now, since we're talking about the prospects for the Ukraine's accession to the EU in 2024, this is going to mean that we have to work in a very prompt and speedy manner. This is a great challenge, but a great opportunity as well. It's worth doing. And I think that we need to do everything possible to take as much advantage of this time as possible and do everything possible and impossible for Ukraine to be quickly adapting and become eventually a full-fledged EU member state, to be able to take advantage of all the privileges. There are two, and I think there are many. So our today's meeting will first of all be dedicated to our component of agri-trade policy. We intended to set up a working group to deal with those specific issues and work on how we can even better and even with more success to take advantage of the DCFTA with the EU that Ukraine had signed before. That was the initial plan at the beginning of the year, but we had never realized that there would have been a warfare going on in Ukraine, and nobody would expect the situation. Nobody expected the situation would change so much, so radically. Now we're facing now a lot of challenges, but there are many opportunities as well. It is the objective of the working group that we set up, that you agreed to cooperate, and so right now, it is important to identify what kind of useful things that we can do to help Ukraine adapt, and its agriculture policy adapt to the EU acquis and the EU requirements, as well as those of DCFTA, and also to help country be well prepared in terms of organization, legislation, regulatory, strategic issues, etc., to make sure we work in a changing environments ever after. So today we have invited so many outstanding representatives from the leading ministries and lead organizations, as well as experts, think tanks, task forces, both local and international. Thank you very much for joining us. I can see we have representatives of the Agriculture Ministry, Ministry of Economy, as well as the State Consumer Protection Service, and there are representatives of associations and Confederation, the Agriculture Union of Ukraine. There are academia and the representative here from the Kiev School of Economics. We can also see our colleagues that had been previously engaged in the ministry work, and then they moved to other agencies and organizations. I can see a representative from the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and Trade. I can see it this way, we have built a very, very good audience. And we have the like-minded people who can think together of the most important and most relevant and urgent and as well as useful matters for Ukraine. This working group will be working in the long run, but we do not want to make it a burden for you. To make sure this working group is as efficient as possible, we asked Mr. Moody, who's the person who have known a lot of you, and we asked him to prepare the concept paper regarding how the working group has to be engaged on the methodology side, what's the focus or focus Cs, and because this is just our kickoff meeting, we just wanted to ask Mr. Moody to present this concept paper. And of course, we'll appreciate getting the feedback from you, whether you agree with those items or you have some remarks to express. Then in follow-up of this, we just wanted to ask the colleague of ours from the academic sphere, and this is the Deputy Director of the Agriculture Economy Institute, Mr. Mykola Puhatov, who will do a very important job, i.e. to discuss the potential issues, areas, and fields that the working group will jump in and start working. Of course, we would like to hear feedback from you as much as possible and have a bit of brainstorming and discussion about all these, and also draw the line of our future plans. We're not going to be making a burden for you. Like I said, we just want to make sure this working group is as much efficient as possible. So before the year end, I think we're going to be able to organize several interactions like this. And Mr. Moody will tell us more about that. And we would like to make sure that in every meeting, we could listen to some of our experts on the dedicated subject matter topics, maybe project ideas or policy papers that you will be developing, depending on our priorities. So we're going to be able to also engage other international experts to also you yourselves, because we also want to make your expertise as much useful as possible. So I hope that our today's meeting will be of interest and use for everybody. And therefore, we will be able to get really tangible action plan and work plan for the nearest future that we will be engaging and referring to both in the conditions of the Marshall Plan and also in the post-war condition. Hopefully, the war will come to an end very soon and we will be able to come back to more, so to say, regular routines. And we'll be preparing for the Ukraine's accession to the European Union, and eventually it's going to become a full-fledged member of the European, so to say, family. Whenever you have any questions beforehand, please express them right now. You can always raise your hand, and there's also one alternative where you can write your questions in the chat. Thanks to COVID, we already learned how Zoom works so well. So whenever you have anything to say, please use those very handy tools. I'm going to be moderating all those questions and remarks. I'm going to be reading them out loud to our speakers, to Mr. Moody and to Mr. Pugachev. And I'm going to be the moderator, like I said, in today's discussion. So let's have a successful discussion during these 2 hours. And it is my pleasure and honor to give the floor to Richard Moody to present our concept paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good afternoon to everybody. So I will briefly, as requested, present the key ideas and the key elements of the proposed working group. Many of you will recognize the elements as the approach that we took within the Agri-Trade Ukraine project. I won't read out the concept paper, but I'll just highlight some of the key points. So starting with the purpose and expected results. Clearly, we're using this as a mechanism to identify key issues, and of course, key issues is a dynamic thing, and so we need to be able to react to situations as they develop. And it's important that the working group is able to adapt its working regime and the mechanisms to be able to deal with that. It's a consultation forum, so a discussion of those key issues to enable the working group members to formulate agri-food policy issues and to hopefully observe the subsequent implementation of some of those policy recommendations and monitor their progress. The expected results, as you would expect, through dialogue, that means involving those who are directly affected by agri-food trade policy and those who are making agri-food trade policy, and those who are participating in that process. Clearly, in the spirit of evidence-based methods, which we've all been using for some time already, this is a mechanism to be able to input the analysis and modeling and data processing into the policy dialogue. Also, we'll be hoping to enable the lessons to be learned from past and current policy implementation in order to be able to improve, and through this transparent process, the trust and the mutual understanding of the participants of the policy dialogue will be increased. Next slide, please. very briefly about the institutional arrangements. It's not a complex mechanism, but it does have two levels. The higher level is the working group, which is as constituted currently, but of course, with the option of expanding or decreasing in order to make it to optimize its working. As we said, to identify, discuss, and prioritize the key agri-food policy trade policy today.
Слайди, колеги, слайди.
Sorry, I'm not watching the, yeah, this is the third slide, please. Institutional arrangements. And the outputs of the working group should include, this is of course not exhaustive, a prioritized list of key policy, agri-food trade policy challenges and opportunities. And clearly we need to have a work plan, which of course will be adapted, reviewed and adapted at the regular meetings of the working group. Also the designation of task forces. I'll come on to talk about the task forces in a minute, as well as another output should be a report on the progress and the lessons learned through the operation of the working group to ensure that any management decisions are made appropriately. Next slide, please. The task forces, this is a recognition that the identification and prioritization participants are not necessarily those who will be involved in the actual technical work. And we've called them task forces because rather than merely sectoral designations like food safety or quality, the task forces should be designated with a specific terms of reference, which is solving a particular challenge or problem that's been identified and prioritized by the working group. The outputs are, as you would expect, concepts, even draft policy measures or drafts of legislation as required, briefing notes, and the idea is that the task force then present their outputs back to the working group for comment, discussion, and actioning where appropriate. Next slide, please. As Maria said, the technical inputs into the working group and the task forces will be provided, of course, by participants where appropriate, but also through the APD short-term expertise resource mechanism, and these technical experts will be expected to produce analysis, modeling, regulatory and impact and environmental analyses, best practices, analyses and gathering of best practices, as well as for each task, also a monitoring framework to enable any subsequent implementation or adoption to be monitored in due course. Next slide, please. The methodology and approach of the working group is also, as you will recognize, multi-stakeholder approach. That's a recognition that agri-food policy dialogue has many participants, many of whom are represented today, and those who have an input into, or should have an input into the dialogue and the eventual definition of agri-food trade policy. Next slide, please. Evidence-based, as we said, basically this is a mechanism for inputting the evidence into the policymaking dialogue. So analyses, modeling, and best practice will all be gathered and presented, targeted at resolving or addressing particular agri-food policy issues. Next slide, please. And from our previous experience, we understand that within agriculture, within trade, within agri-food trade, there are many different elements and constituent parts which are all interacting, and policy solutions for problems have to be systemic. That means analyzing the systems, including the official control system, the quality infrastructure system, as well as a systemic approach to value chains, and seeing where the weak points are and how best to approach them in a systemic and holistic way. Next slide, please. As mentioned already, task-based approach, in order to give the task forces a clear objective, a clear definition of what's to be achieved, and so that a task force is created for a specific task, and then it's dissolved once that task has been resolved. So this requires some preparation in the terms of reference, but it ensures that that the results of the task force are concrete and targeted to resolving the problems that have been identified. This should be a consultation mechanism, of course, due to previous COVID constraints and currently to the constraints imposed by the war. Consultation is not an easy process, and so we need to use all methods possible to consult the key stakeholders, including those who can't attend meetings as such, but also those who are perhaps more involved in those who are directly and indirectly impacted by agri-food policy. So including farmers and processors and those who are providing inputs, those who are providing services to the agri-food trade sector. International expertise, as we said, is introduced including by APD identifying and inputting short-term expertise, but also sometimes it may be more advantageous to invite other experts from other projects, from other institutions. Basically, we should look for the expertise where it's most appropriate, where it's most readily available, but also where that expertise is specifically targeted at the issues of Ukraine. That means that Ukrainians know Ukrainian problems best of all, and in many cases also know the most appropriate solutions to those. Next slide, please. The idea is that that meetings, both of the working group and the ad hoc groups, and also consultations, etc., are documented the word recorded is using there. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be recorded, but the key conclusions and the findings and the conclusions and the recommendations of such meetings should be documented and inputted into the process. And of course, then, as we say, the working group will also produce an annual report and such documentations of the discussions and deliberations should form a part of that annual report. Next slide, please. The task forces, as has already been said, will be given specific tasks with timelines, and will report regularly to the working group, either orally or in written form, so that the working group is aware of how the task forces are operating. And clearly the working group, after the delivery of the outputs from the task forces, will be asked to engage in the advocacy explanation of those agri-food policy solutions to decision makers in the government, in the parliament, and also to the private sector. And in accordance with, sorry, the last slide, next slide and last slide. Because the working group will be attempting to recommend policy changes or policy additions, and assuming that that those are adopted, at least in part, then it'll be very important to monitor the progress and success, or otherwise, of those policy recommendations, to make sure that where appropriate, changes can be made, where successes are noted, that further development or extensions or rollouts can be undertaken. So those are the thoughts which were included in the policy agri-food policy working group concept. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm very happy to answer. Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо, Річард, дякуємо за представлення.
Thank you so much, Richard, for this presentation of the concept paper. Dear colleagues, as you have probably seen and heard, that we tried to actually put this document together so that it is simple, very clear, and hopefully really efficient. But I would like to actually once again stress a couple of points. The first thing that we need to understand is this working group needs to satisfy the needs of Ukraine. For this to happen, we would expect your active support and engagement, because you will be the ones to decide what's important and what's not. It's not that the German and Ukrainian agri-political dialogue will be insisting on something, or Richard will be underlining the importance of some of the items versus the others. But it is the Ukrainian side that is well placed to decide on the priorities, because you know best what Ukraine needs right now. So please help us focus on those areas which require most of our support, so that we can help you engage the right experts, and we can engage the right international expertise that you might need. We're going to help organize so many different meetings that will be helpful for you, so that at the end of the day, we achieve the result that we all want. We're already aware that unfortunately in Ukraine, we've had some negative experience in many working groups that had been set up, that fail to be efficient. And that's something that we want to avoid. We really want our working group to be as useful as possible, to have regular meetings that are tangible. Sorry. That's why the idea was not to have very frequent meetings, but when it does, though, we will be listening to our colleagues and endorse all the different outputs. For instance, the vision, notes, documents, whatever they elaborate, we need to take a look at that. And then in this holistic discussion, we will talk about this, express remarks or complaints or anything, and then coordinate our effort to make the finalized version. This way, we will save a lot of time, and at the same time, we will be producing very useful products, very useful outputs. I understand everybody keeps busy. You always have a lot of work to do, but we would like to actually make it, so to say, not easy, but as simple as possible for you.
Підробочі групки, цільові групки, так, дякую.
The task forces that Richard has mentioned just now, those will be those smaller teams of experts that will be just engaging dedicated professionals who know a lot about the European best practice and that of Ukraine. For instance, we figure out, oh, that is a priority. Let us design the recommendations for the phytosanitary standards. Then, okay, we understand that not everybody will be involved in the same task force, and not everybody is the same quality expert in this subject matter. But anyways, we will put the people together, they will elaborate their outputs, and you will all see that. You will all be able to read and share your comments about that. If, for instance, you have other suggestions or remarks, you'll be always to let us know and express whatever you want to express. I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet, but if you have them, please raise your hand and we will let you speak up. So, since this is not the case yet, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Pugachev, who will talk about some of the specific things that we have to offer. But once again, these are just the proposals from ourselves right now, as of today. We would really expect some of the proposals from you because the work, first of all, will have to be of use for yourself. We don't just want to tick the box and forget about it. No, thank you. Mr. Pugachev, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the opportunity as well to take part in today's meeting. Thanks for this possibility to express our views on how we think the working group needs to work. Speaking about so many different work areas, the first thing that I recall is the famous phrase that the other person said, that you cannot grasp the ungraspable. When we're talking about the agri-food issues in today's environment, we first of all see the challenges that happened due to the full-fledged war that Russia posed in Ukraine. And those problems face exports, imports, and agri-food in general. This requires thought of new sales markets, new exportation avenues, new suppliers, vehicles, etc. In this dimension, I believe that these challenges and those areas are very, very important for so many different agri-food producers, as well as for processing companies and for other agri-food market actors. If we, as the working group that is dedicated and intended to work for 2, 3, or maybe even 4 years, if we just focus on those short-term things and challenges, I think this way we would lose a lot of capacity that we have and that we can engage to look at the prospects, to see take a look at the issues that our agri-food sector has had for many years and continues to have. Those are the unresolved issues that still last, and maybe there'll be the new emerging ones as well. When speaking about the short-term issues, this is what I alluded to already regarding the alternative export avenues and logistical things. Those challenges are tackled by the Logistical Council in the Agri-Food Logistics. It is chaired by the Agriculture Minister. So it seems to me that we don't have to let ourselves duplicate those functions and provoke any overlaps with the other government agencies. We are the working group that is intended and designed to have a look at the future. And we've known of some of the challenging issues already. And they are not only of short-term, but also of mid and long-term nature. The short-term problems created many more issues. For instance, seeking additional export avenues. That triggers another question. Can we build any kind of public support mechanism to this new logistics? That's an issue of insurance, that's an issue of cargo transportation, vehicles, delivery conditions, etc. Maybe for some of the participants here, for our stakeholders, those issues are very relevant. If so, then we need to think who really can do the job and who's interesting to do that. To put the boots on the ground. Of course, if we look at our prospects for the future, then of course, our priority is EU membership, which translates into the following thing. Our agri-food producers will have access to all the European markets. The access will be very much facilitated and easy, but that will apply to only those producers who will fully comply with all the requirements and conditions. For this purpose, one of the issues is very relevant for the mid and long term. This is about standards, food safety, and compliance. I'm sure those issues will be very much interesting for the producers and the associations of them. And I think that's of great use for all those actors and beneficiaries. There is no doubt to say that it is important to consider the regulatory impact. Well, let's say the impact of political decisions on various stakeholder groups in their diversity. We need to be very sensitive to the different categories from the standpoint of the economic impact on them from any kind of change or any kind of policy. We need to avoid making undiscussed decisions because sometimes that is the case. And the brightest example is the soybean amendments. The amendments were done overnight with no prior discussion whatsoever, and that led to many actors in the market suffering. And I can give you hundreds of more examples like this. The economics, the mathematical analysis, impact analysis from the political decisions on whatever export bans or restrictions or import restrictions. This all can be a really important thing that we could actually consider and elaborate with under the auspices of our working group, together with our team members. For the Ukrainian producers, there is another relevant issue, which is seeking new sales markets and seeking new consumers. The key Ukrainian produce consumers have always been countries I mean, those have been there, and there are some of the prospects. Those are Asian countries and African states. For that purpose, we need to take advantage of all the opportunities out there that DCFTA provides us. So whenever our producers can comply with the quality standards and conditions of the EU, this may open up huge opportunities to have access to the other markets worldwide, virtually for all of them. I think if you comply with the European requirements, you're going to comply with most of the requirements around the globe. So in this respect, it is extremely important to ask ourselves a question. What kind of risks our exporters will be bearing if we get integrated to the European Union completely? What about the other sales markets in a case like this? Or what about the emerging markets? That is why it is so crucially important to analyze all the requirements in the EU and see the DCFTA as a promising mechanism to expand the Ukrainian agricultural export. That's an opportunity for us to take advantage of the capacity that has not been utilized to the full scale, or sometimes even not sufficiently explored. So I think we will do a great job and a very important major contribution to employ as much of the Ukraine's potential as possible. It is also possible to assess all the risks and threats that might take place when we reach out to the new markets and once we are integrated with the EU. What if we never paid attention to this? And what if we've never seen the potential impacts? If so, then if we can do the job, I think it's going to be a major benefit from our engagement for the entire country. This is in a nutshell what I wanted to tell you about, but in closing, I would like to tell you about one more thing. What I really don't want is that we do the firefighting. I don't want that. We cannot fight the fires currently in the agriculture, in the Ukraine's agriculture. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is think and elaborate our prospects for the short, medium, and long-term future of the Ukrainian agriculture. Thank you so much, Mykola. Yeah, what you said truly resonates with what I think. Firefighting is nevertheless important, but because we have now hopefully set up the working group that will be engaged on the basis of the other needs, but not just fighting the fires all around Ukraine. I think there are some of the promising issues, because those issues that sometimes are not paid due attention to are not going away. I mean, sometimes they last forever and they have major impacts in the long run. And we cannot let it go like that. So thank you for referring to that point, and thank you as well for underlining the importance of not overlapping and not repeating what the other people have been doing already. So we will be so much grateful if you also, dear colleagues, give us your feedback. You can, for instance, report, okay, if you want to talk about logistics, there are a lot of working groups and think tanks and whatever task forces that are engaged in this. Let them do that job and we're going to take something different. Maybe there are some of the issues that are unexplored yet, or maybe there is very little to no expertise somewhere else that we can jump in and sort it. So maybe these are the two things that we want to keep in mind all the time. With regards to the items that you have kindly mentioned, Yes, seeking alternative expert avenues, that's a good thing to do. Of course, we can also do a job somewhere around insurance. Like we had discussed before, we had to work on the standards. We have to continuously work on them, on food safety and compliance. This is an absolutely different topic, but we nevertheless touched upon it before. From the methodology standpoint, once again, we need to make it really fact and evidence-based in whatever we do. And we also need to be sensitive to the impact assessment. And to make an impact assessment, we will have to do a bit of modeling. That's the only way to develop and implement evidence-based policies. We need to have the data that can be verified, the data that can be projected for the future, and also we need relevant data to support our statement or so. We need to analyze how the EU integration can bring us not only opportunities, but also pose risks. We need to consider them both. And I think that's something that is really relevant. I think yesterday, a lot of you already heard at least that the European Union already considers the possibility to lift all lifting all the restrictions for just 12 months. Well, let it be for just 12 months, and we're going to see later how it works. At least for 1 year, that's not too bad, is it? So today we're almost halfway through the year, and we'll see how quickly we can actually fix all the other things. Maybe there is need in awareness. We need to build more awareness. Maybe there are other focus areas that have to be communicated well. A major contribution was done by the previous project called Agri-Trade in Ukraine. But of course, there are still open questions. So that could be part of our engagement as well. And here's something else I wanted to emphasize. According to our APD planning, we've had it and we're going to continue to have it on our plan to perform a survey among agricultural producers. Maybe they're interested or they already tried to export their markets to the EU markets. Maybe some of them have already tried, but it didn't work. Maybe we can find out about some of the popular gaps and bottlenecks that they've seen. I think despite the war, we will also be able to conduct this, I'm afraid to say in the nearest future, but maybe in a, so to say, foreseeable future, we can get this information from them to be able to make follow-up decisions on what has to be improved or changed or simplified or facilitated to make sure this mechanism is working fine. This is a brief conclusion from what you have said so far. Now there's an opportunity for all our participants to express whatever they want to say. Because in our next meeting that hopefully will take place maybe in a month or so, we could already suggest something, at least the first steps in the respective priorities that we will actually define today. Let us make sure this is not just our initiative. It comes not from ourselves only, but it comes from you. So we would like to have this push from your side. Any remarks, anything that you would like to express, please? We're going to be more than glad to hear. Alexander. Hello, everybody. Hi. It's so important to take part in today's meeting, and I'm supportive of all the things that my predecessors have expressed, like monitoring, market analysis, whatever is most useful and lucrative for the Ukrainian producers and exporters. To make sure our work is useful enough, in the first phase, I would support this survey. You know why? Because this survey will lay the foundation, will set the scene for much more fertile work.
дійсно проблема, або з якими проблемами
Once
стикаються.
we've done the survey, we're going to find out a lot about the current challenges that the Ukrainian exporters are facing. And maybe we could do the similar survey across the EU member states. For instance, I have the colleagues of mine who've been working in Germany and they import products, including from Ukraine. And they're also facing challenges. So why don't we do this survey in the first phase? Let us send questions to importers and exporters. This will be a very good reference point. Let's not take all the areas. Let's not take everything at once, because that's going to be too much. I don't think we will have enough capacity to process all this feedback in a concise manner. We're going to focus on some of the priority areas, which should not be many. Maybe there is something that we have in the pipeline already to formulate questions and disseminate across the different producers and exporters of the agricultural produce. I think this would have been a great opportunity to make the first push and to set the scene for our follow-up work in the future. Thank you so much, Alexander. Olga,
Добре.
Да, все.
Дякую.
does
Дякую.
everything work? Yes, I'm sorry, maybe you had a technical issue. Well, regarding this survey, yes, I'm in favor of what you said, Alexander. Our initiative was to actually have it in April, but now we realize that many people in agriculture have to do different things at this point of time because of the sowing campaign. But now we still have a small survey that we conduct with them. We're going to try. If they will respond adequately to some of the questions we may ask, if that actually works, I think in a week or two, we're going to have an understanding about this. If so, then we will have it done in the next couple of months to have this reliable information before our next meeting. If you see they're very busy, then we will do it later. Hopefully the war will be over by the time. I keep saying that every single meeting, and it's been 2 months that I'm saying this. But I honestly have the hope for it. I just want this martial law and this distress that we're all surviving and all the other producers do, not to have negative impact on their answers. Because people in a stressful situation, they cannot answer responsibly. That's why my suggestion was to not only to do the survey in Ukraine, but also across some of the EU member states. Could you help us do that? Could you facilitate? Maybe you can have suggestions regarding which countries should we cover. We could start actually from a relatively close circle, because we do, for instance, the first ditch effort. Let's survey like 10 to 20 participants to see how much productive the survey findings will be. If we see the questionnaire works fine and the participants do not interface any problems whenever they fill out the forms, then we're gonna do it in an expanded manner by engaging more people. And then this way we will already have a sufficient pool of respondents. Then after, as we establish everything and as the situation hopefully improves in Ukraine, we could do a larger survey across the EU among all the importers. Maybe somebody has never tried to import from Ukraine, but seeing this as a prospect for them. Dear colleagues, any remarks about that whatsoever? Larissa, please, you have your raised hand. Do you want to talk about this, or you want to talk about something else? No, I just wanted to express my own views. I absolutely agree with the comments shared by Alexander regarding the survey. That's probably the main thing that we do. We need to respond to the real demands. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Dear colleagues, any other remarks, any criticism about Alexander's proposal? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Korinets. There is a practice of annual surveys for exporters and importers from Ukraine. Well, yeah, well, we're going to use that experience. Anyone objects against such a survey? There is nobody. All in favor. We'll use this tacit consent as a yes. So we're going to employ this principle as well. If you do not reject it, then it's accepted. So we're going to be offering such a survey, and we're going to report back to you on how we organize this in the nearest future, because we're going to be running this. So before our next meeting, we're going to make sure that we have some of the findings. Larissa, please. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm so happy to see everybody at the table. In quotations, of course. Earlier on, we were engaged in so many different APD initiatives. We never had these, working groups of this gravity before. And thank you very much, Richard, for drawing the line around all those tools to make sure the working group is as productive as possible. We really need tangible instruments, which are not so many from our own experience. Hopefully, with your support, we're going to develop many more very efficient tools. I think this, if considering the working group as a platform, this is going to be a really, really important mechanism. Whenever you do this survey, please share the findings with us. We will then think about how we can best use it and adapt to the current objectives and tasks that we're all involved in. I've seen Mr. Rushkov here, but I can see he's gone. But I wanted to tell you, nevertheless, we were talking about the European integration. The European integration is primarily based on DCFTA and its performance. The major part of it is the free trade, isn't it? So we're all mindful that the European Union started as the common market. So this was an economic community of countries. Politically, they came to agreement later. So first of all, we need to join the European Union economically, to have clear bonds with the other countries, with the EU member states, and to be as close to them as possible. That's why DCFTA is crucial for us. But in the DCFTA, in the first part, it says that the first party, the primary party to the agreement is the state. What the state is supposed to do is to align its legislation. Unfortunately, we can see issues there. First of all, we can see some of the back moves, so to say, in terms of our legislation harmonization. It's not everywhere, they're not everywhere, but there are somewhere. There's another point that I continuously stress being the member of EU-Ukraine Civil Society Organization. We need to have financial support. We've enjoyed a lot of the financial support from the EU, but there was no adequate response financially from the Ukrainian side. Being the representative of a civil society organization and being actually the leader of one of the key agriculture associations think tanks, we want to actually consider and doing the job only that job that the state cannot cope with. For instance, we work with standards. We work with the standards according to the WTO and association agreement. However, in our society, there's no proper understanding of how much important that is. And that probably one of the that probably causes one of the adverse impacts. Compliance, standards, best practices that have been applied by so many different countries, and there are also international standards. There are a lot of EU standards, which are many that are aligned with the standards on the global, in the markets worldwide. That does not work particularly well in Ukraine. So we need to focus our attention on this sphere, which is called food safety and quality. Among the two major objectives is recovery and logistics. I mean, recovery of the damaged capabilities, but you know, logistics is part that is related to from the field to the table or to the fork, like they say in Ukraine. Compliance of our legislation should be the precondition for getting the recovery funds. I've been saying a lot that our agriculture has to be linked closely with the association agreement, but it's not yet. In the recovery agenda, this is a critical point. We don't have a lot of money, and spending that money for things that do not bring more compliance with standards, this is something that we don't have to do. Regarding legislation, we've seen this practice a lot lately. I don't want to give you specific examples about this, but sometimes whenever there is an Euro integration objective, we have the draft legislation, the bill that crosses away all those European integrational items. There are things that just annihilate all the aspirations. And recently we've seen a lot of that. I think we need to reinforce legislative monitoring, as Mr. Pugachev alluded to. And we need to do that in a proper way. And look at how European integration is pursued. New markets outreach. It cannot be possible without compliance. It cannot be done without the verified food security, food safety and food quality. So this is one of the key issues as well. And there is another thing, my last point, but not the least one. As for legislative requirements and the voluntary regulations, our society has demonstrated a great degree of solidarity and valor, as well as the ability to self-organize. Hopefully the same self-organization will be engaged whenever we want to actually achieve compliance with all the food safety and food quality standards. In the previous agri-trade APD-led project, I think some of the steps were done, but we need to just reinforce them and do the follow-up to strengthen those areas. Thanks to this brilliant working group as a platform for very promising engagement and efficient outcomes. Thank you very much, Larissa, for mentioning a couple of very important bullet points. I will just conclude with, and we'll see if I understood you well. So right now, there are issues with the annexes to the agreement, so we cannot see where we are right now. So there's need for it. We need to have updates to those papers. That's one point. And then the second one is you were suggesting to consider a separate issue, which is the voluntary standards to be considered. Yes, we'll put that down as well in the minutes. That has to do with the compliance standards. And that's one of the preconditions to potentially get the recovery funds. And we probably have to define what things have to be part of that agenda. Do you have any kind of definitions? Yes, we need to develop the recovery vision based on, I didn't I didn't define it in a proper way, but it just should be like DCFTA based recovery agenda, because we need to comply with all the European standards. And there is one more important thing that you mentioned is monitoring the legislation about the potential incompliances of some of the bills that are in the pipeline currently in the parliament, because they're not in line with all the requirements that under the DCFTA, as well as under the association agreement and our integration steps. So one of the areas could be this comprehensive and holistic legislative analysis with needs and risks assessment. maybe there are changes that have to be implemented. Well, the amendments are in the annexes to the AA association agreement. We need to monitor how those provisions of the association agreement are being performed, because it's all very vibrant. I mean, it's changing very quickly. We want to make sure our association agreement is not focused on what took place like 10 to 15 years ago. We want to make sure it is hand in hand with the with this European acquis, which is being updated on a regular basis. But what I meant was to monitor the Ukrainian legislation and see whether there are gaps that require our close and foremost attention, because those gaps may then be converted into bottlenecks. Regarding sustainability, I think this is another issue which is probably cross-cutting everywhere, because we've been discussing this everywhere. The agriculture and trade policy, they all have to be sustainable, and they had to be viewed from the sustainability standpoint. Thank you very much. I just took note of all the important bullets that you've mentioned. I can see 3 more raised hands. Probably those are comments to what Larissa has explained. As far as I understand, Maria was first. So please, Maria, and then we're gonna go one by one. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can. I'm from the Kiev School of Economics. Maria, you mentioned just now in your last sentence about the sustainability requirement. I would like to disclose this topic a little bit. Well, look, the main agenda for our working group engagement is to define, and well, is to see whether there are some of the gaps in our DCFTA performance, where we underperformed or there are still opportunities that are unexplored yet. For the last 6 years, we've been trying to dig and find everything in DCFTA, while the European Union introduced a new policy that will come into force as of the 1st of January 2023. This is the Green Deal that we've all heard about. But I would like to tell you what, we cannot lose this new EU agriculture policy from our attention. It should be considered in close affinity with DCFTA. As you probably heard last week, Ukraine has actually failed and submitted the first part of the questionnaire and sent it to the European Commission. I think as much as my judgment can tell, I think the Ukrainian government is trying to do everything possible in a very prompt manner to make sure Ukraine is let go into the European Union as soon as possible. But taking into account the new agriculture policy, I understand this year and next year, probably Ukraine will hardly be expected to take very serious moves towards changing its agriculture sustainability and performing all the criteria that have already been designed for the EU member states in line with the Green Deal. But nevertheless, sooner or later, this will be the case for us, and we will have to do the job much faster and be prepared much earlier than the other member states. That means that we will have to actually implement promptly this entire environmental policy of the EU. Over the last couple of weeks, the EU and the Ukrainian producers, as well as policymakers, not just put in doubt, but keep telling about some of the possible changes in that agriculture policy due to the war in Ukraine, and it may lead to the global food crisis. But anyways, those macro changes can hardly be expected in the EU sustainability and agriculture policy, but we nevertheless have to be prepared for it, because this will have to do with part of the renewables. Oh, sorry, not renewables, but as part of the recovery. This is everything that I wanted to mention. Thank you. Thank you so much as well. Honestly, our attention in APD and in this specific component will definitely be dedicated to the Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy. This is something that we cannot evade and do not have to. We must not do that. This is the midterm prospect for Ukraine, isn't it? And if we want to be to assume the full-fledged EU membership eventually, then of course we need to think and realize that everything that currently applies or will shortly apply to the European farmers will soon be applicable to the Ukrainian farmers. And there is a match with what Larissa has just said. So yes, of course, we're going to take this into consideration. So one of the areas will be to actually define those prospects and identifying gaps in the Ukraine's performance versus the next year changes in the agriculture and sustainability policies. All right, please, I'm ready, Olga. Olga is here. Hello, I'm sorry that I'm speaking without a video, but nevertheless, I'm happy to see everybody and hear you. What I want to tell you about regarding what our service is doing in terms of food safety. We have a number of different donor-led projects. There is a number of donors who have been helping us to design the new standards and make sure Ukraine complies with those applied already. So we have to design our legislation and regulatory frameworks in proper alignment with those of the European Union. So will since we're going to be doing this work that you already mentioned, maybe it is worth indicating one important thing. We need to put together another meeting with donors to coordinate whatever they do versus what we do, because there are a lot of things that have already been done or that are being done currently. I cannot see any problem of organizing such a meeting to coordinate the efforts, because a lot of work has been done in sanitary and phytosanitary agendas. So let us think about the possibility to organize such a meeting with the donors. We can see where the overlaps or duplications are. We can also see the gaps that we can actually get involved in and find solutions for those. Well, that way, I think it's going to be a very efficient thing for both Ukraine, our consumers, and the consumers in the EU, as well as the exporters. So this is just my comment that I wanted to share with you. If you think it resonates with you, I'll be so grateful for this kind of initiative. Thank you very much, Olga. Yes, certainly. We're always ready to talk to our donors. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is it's not always as easy to understand who's doing what and to coordinate so many different donors, especially in these kind of circumstances. It had been even difficult beforehand, before the war started. If you could help us do that somehow, or maybe even if you could actually recommend where, in which areas you would seek our support and where we would be the most appropriate. Maybe there are some of the open questions or some of the gaps where we can be useful in bridging them. I think this would be the most appropriate thing because your service is the beneficiary in so many different projects, including ours. So I think it is the Ukrainian side who is best placed to tell us where you want to get most of our support and what should be the scope. Okay, let us first of all have an internal conversation in our service, and then we're going to come back to you with our decision or recommendation. Thank you so much for that, Olga. I saw Alexei Roshkov, and next one, oh, you were the next to have raised your hand. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Well, 3 out of 5. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so happy to see Mr. Moody once again. Thank you for being active in supporting our country again. It's so nice that Larissa Starikova has not forgotten our ministry. And she even recalled myself personally. That is so nice. Isn't it lovely? I just wanted to tell you a bit about where we are at the moment in our collaboration with the EU and in our DCFTA agenda, in its particularly trade part. There are some of the steps that we're trying to elaborate, and there's something that we would expect from the project to help. And also we could suggest something to the project. Maybe there is some help that we can deliver to the project. Well, indeed, today the Council of the European Union and European Parliament yesterday published their decisions. There is preferential treatment for Ukraine that will last for 1 year. And actually this is about lifting all the quotas and restrictions on the Ukrainian produce. There are also unprecedented steps included, which had never been the case before within the EU history regarding the input prices. Because that part was something that Ukraine wanted to reconsider as part of the DCFTA trade chapter. Regarding the restrictions and limitations, even though the restrictions are the restrictions lifted will only last for 1 year. I mean, this preferential treatment will only be for 1 year available. But I don't think, nevertheless, that after the 12 months passed, Ukraine will come back to the same limited environment and limited conditions. I think the conditions will be much more liberal and much more supportive than they are even right now, since we will have had some experience from the 12 months of no restrictions and quotas. I'm sorry, but I cannot hear everything that Mr. Roshkov is saying. It sounds like he's talking from the basement. What he's talking about is the 35 different chapters or parts of the membership agreement, and we need to somehow start negotiating with the EU, specifically with regards to the parts related to agriculture and food supplies. The agenda is very clear for us. The Ministry of Economy and the Agriculture Ministry, the Government Office, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we all understand what we need to do to reach out to the European market. And the Ukrainian businesses continue to operate despite the open aggression from Russia. we still work to expand our presence in the European markets. And as an additional part that we have today, we sometimes keep forgetting about it. But there is a priority, the plan of priority steps endorsed by the Ministry of Economy and DigiTrade. Those priority steps have to do with the priority steps for our bilateral trade, not bilateral, but EU-Ukraine trade for 2021-22. If there's need to dive into these issues in more detail, we have enough expertise and we could make a presentation to you about this. This is an unparalleled document that you will probably love to hear details about. This will include the things that have been already elaborated and performed by the trade component under DCFTA, and I think this is something that can really be feasible and that can help us a lot in our future engagement. At least that's our thinking. This would have been great if at least you could share some part of that information and we could have a discussion about that. That's not even a question about that. We're going to do it. We're ready. We're ready to actually present you things that we've done, some of our outputs as well, and ideas. We will coordinate the format and all the modalities, as well as the speaker who will be best positioned to present this information to you. Well, so far we will start considering this issue unless there are other emergencies, which I'm so afraid to tell about. But you never know what's going to happen, so let's keep in touch. I do apologize, but I will have to disconnect in about 5 minutes to attend another meeting that I have scheduled. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much, Alexei. It would have been great. Thank you very much for your, Mr. Pavlo, confirmation of the relevance and urgency of this matter. We definitely need to see and learn more about the plan of priority steps. I think in our last meeting, we will definitely want to hear that. And we will schedule our next meeting for the end of. Well, we're going to tell you about it later. Regarding focusing our efforts on the pre-accession talks and negotiations, I know they're preparatory work. Yes, as you clearly outlined, of course, we need to coordinate that with the German federal government. But if we can be of any use there too, yes, sure, we can focus on that. And at least we can help, at least partially, with what has to do with agriculture in this context. Thank you. I think we will certainly pay attention to that. And we can't wait for your priority steps presentation. Well, I saw a hand from Mr. Tchaikovsky. Is that still relevant? Yes, it is, of course. So glad to welcome everybody. Hi, I'd like to point some of the things, and Alexei has already expressed one thing that is in line with my vision. Of course, we all know that Ukraine is a member to so many different international organizations, which enabled its membership in WTO. Our legislation has been so many times amended, and I'm talking about the phytosanitary standards. We've been trading with the entire world, including the EU. Everything's great. Life continues. But sometimes to reach out to the new markets, political decisions are required. Sometimes you face those stories. Yes, of course, we are in compliance with all the phytosanitary requirements of our international partners, trade partners. But you can never be perfect enough. Regarding new European regulations, the phytosanitary requirements are developing over time and they get changed. But the message that was voiced today regarding entry to the European markets, this will of course open the I support that 200%, but what would be useful today, in my view, especially given the war? The survey is fine, but you will never get the proper picture because you might understand the planting season and this. Nonetheless, problems are faced in logistics because our Ukrainian produce cannot be taken away to other countries. In some of the commodities, we rank number 1 or 2. In some of the other, we're top 5 to 10. This and the European Union knows this, and the whole world knows this. But there are logistic European Union through the Ukrainian seaports. In my personal view, it would be very useful to actually prepare our potential exporters to comply with the European requirements. This would have been useful. Let's do maybe a questionnaire or whatever survey about what kind of products from the European Union can be brought to Ukraine and back. Build the questionnaire. With the engagement of so many projects and international expertise. Some of them still work, some of the others have stopped, which is another complication, but we are ready to continue our engagement with them. But this is not a question to forum start the others. But and of course, Ukraine's preparation for EU accession and EU membership, like Mr. Roshkov said, it would be very, very useful. This is one of the messages that I wanted to share with you. There's a lot of work that has already been done. Like Olga just mentioned, the legislation was liberalized a lot. The regulatory norms and phytosanitary standards, some of them are in the pipeline, some of the bills are not yet passed, but this required a lot of effort over time. You know that the European Union still adopts new regulations. And of course, why should we try to implement something old-fashioned? Do something more cutting edge and state of the art. Glory be to Ukraine. Thank you. Glory be to the hero. The work that has been done to adapt the Ukraine's legislation to that of the European one is just huge. It's enormous. Involved in other activities, unlike a in contrast to that, we were more supporting Ukraine through discussions, through creating communication platforms. Hopefully this is going to change in the near and we can do a great job. Potentially we could help the importers prepare for the new market conditions. That's one of the possible areas, as well as prepare Ukraine for the EU membership. It's important to underline that if and when Ukraine joins the EU, all those directives and regulations will automatically come into force for Ukraine as well. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comment and for your inputs. All right, Pavlo, please. We cannot. I want to thank you very much for setting up this meeting. I cannot repeat enough about the relevance of the issues that we've been discussing together. I think amongst the speakers, we at least have three major trends. Three issues seem to be kind of cross-cutting because and this could be the basis for our project and our working group engagement. First of all, this is strategizing, because there's the whole bundle of different issues. It was mentioned by Maria, agencies. I want to thank them very much for finding the time to join us today. One part of the questionnaire has been approved and they recommend to start filling the second one. These are already the technical implementation steps, and they stress that there is a great deal of work prior to accession. If you remember, Maria, we were talking about how to get this information from some of the predecessors who entered the European Union, who joined it beforehand, before ourselves, because they have a lot of lessons learned and best practices. So if the project has this opportunity and you can engage experts into that, that's all very valuable part of our strategy. The second part, which is very hot, it's really breaking, this is logistics. We've been talking about the exports and agriculture strategy, agri-policy, and etc. We've elaborated a lot of documents like Strategy 2030, food security, etc. Everything touched upon logistics, but the recent developments have actually have introduced immense adjustments to the logistics. Some of the changes have to be made into logistics strategically. So logistics is number two. And the third issue that Richard mentioned in his intervention, and Larissa Starikov and myself, I think we need to pay closer attention to another thing. Even if we have trade facilitation for 1 year, there'll be facilitation in the quotas and customs duties, but nobody because compliance has to be there. So let's not consider this a warm bath. It's not going to be like this. So we need to be mindful of the need to conform with all the food safety requirements. The truth was explained by some of the experts here that the European strategy is there. There are changes and things implemented in the European regulatory and legislative frameworks. There's Green Deal. We need to be considering that in our pre-accession time. And who's keeping track on an ongoing manner how those hottest and most important priorities are performed, and who is keeping an eye on what kind of items have to be included into our strategy. Some of the people have been talking as if they were already in the European Union, at least partly, but we're not yet there. We have to work hard on so many different matters. So I understand these are the three areas that we need to actually dive into. It was a very good idea from Alexander Parahashuk. We need to talk to the two major groups of beneficiaries, importers and exporters. We need to be responsive to what they say and to whatever they're facing. That's why these are probably not the three, but the four pillars that I would focus on. 6 months to 12 months of the project engagement. And all in all, thank you very much, dear colleagues, for joining us. And back to you again. Re-export from the EU is a relevant issue. I mean, re-exporting the Ukrainian produce. That's the issue that requires close attention. Once again, we want to underline we're so much grateful to the European Union for its support for Ukraine, but re-export, this is something that will help Ukraine in fight against against famine and starvation around the globe. That is in line with our strategy and with our policies. So this issue is on the agenda today. There are international standards that allow play this game, but at the same time, possibly in some of the parts, closer attention is needed. This is just my hypothesis. Yes, of course, there are long lines queuing at the border as we're trying to export our agriculture commodities. So we need to consider once again the re-export possibilities technically as well. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Thanks very much for adding more insights. I want to express words of gratitude to you, Mr. Kowal, for actually focusing on the 4 major areas. You mentioned the Green Deal and the best practices of other countries. Number 2, you mentioned logistics. We're going to be looking at that definitely and see what we can do around it. Also regarding standards, this is something that you said, and food safety. Of course, those requirements will stay. The issue with the questionnaire, we're going to try to actually push it in the nearest future possible. Thank you, Mr. Yukhnovsky. Oleg. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much, Maria. Thanks very much for the invitation to join the working group. And it's so nice for me that the backbone of the working group and its engagement is created and supported by Mr. Richard Moody. I want to thank him personally for this. And thank you for very practicable and tangible insights. The other day, we did a lot of work to draft legislations, and we were engaged in so many different activities to counteract those bad trade practices. I think Richard knows what I'm talking about. This is implementation of EU directives, also the expertise support, because the project was actually endorsed by the Food and Agriculture Association, so further support, analytical engagement, overview of how other EU member states have implemented their respective policies to take into consideration their best practices. Thank you very much. I think these are the items that are very important for our agenda. Thank you very much, Oleg. Did I get you right? You said something, this directive 633/2019. There is already an endorsed bill. It has been coordinated by so many different associations, and it has to be tabled soon. Yeah, I found it. This is directive as of April 17th, 2019 on unfair trading practices in business to business, blah, blah, trading practices in agricultural and other products. Thank you so much. That is clear. Thank you very much, Oleg. I can see that gradually we're coming to an end of our today's meeting, but nevertheless, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Roman as well, and we're going to be wrapping up soon. Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'll be very quick. Largely, whenever we talk about international trade, we're talking about formalities, rules, etc. That's my first point. And my second point is that we normally talk about largest companies. If we're talking about the European Union, of course, the rules are important, like for everybody, but an important actor in the international trade is small business and medium business. I think for the EU, it's very important to consider all the rules, conditions, and actors who are working in this area so that small and medium businesses could also be part of the international trade. I think this aspect is of crucial importance, isn't it? Yes, indeed. Did I get you right, Roman? What you're talking about is to make an awareness building campaign or something like this to promote expert opportunities for the Ukrainian SMEs. Yes, that's one thing. And also making all the institutions aware of this kind of pursuit, because there is good European practice to support such small and medium enterprises. Let's take Poland. We can learn a lot of best practices from there. There's an agency that's been so elaborate, their ministry in Poland, that has a lot of experience in that. Thank you. That's a very important contribution. We're going to definitely take note of that. Oleg, did you have a comment, or you never raised, or you never put down your hand that you'd raised before? Wow, you probably didn't do it. Maria. Here in the chat, I think there is Mykola Moroz. I think that's an important emphasis there. Yes, Mr. Moroz, thank you. This is about food safety. The work is being already done, but about the trade standards, that's not yet the case. So I think our working group will come back to this issue more actively. Thank you very much, Mr. Moroz. If you wanted to share your comment, you can still make your comments. The opportunities are there. Well, if this is not the case, I think that's an exhaustive remark. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I'm sorry for taking a bit more time than we expected initially, but once again, we want to thank our speakers. Thanks very much, Richard, for preparing the concept paper. Thanks very much to Mr. McCullough for having presented his vision around the main issues of our agenda for the working group. I think many of the ideas will be additionally noted by ourselves and follow up of our today's meeting. This was just the first inception meeting, but nevertheless, we're going to prepare the minutes and we will disseminate the minutes for your consideration. So as all the materials, all the deliverables. There is the concept paper. There are presentations available in both languages. So we're going to circulate that as well, dear colleagues. And then we're going to suggest at least the date for our next meeting. Hopefully this is going to be late June or early July. In that meeting, we're going to be so glad to hear from Mr. Roshkov about the priority steps plan. Maybe he will be able to make a presentation for us. Hopefully by that time, we're going to have information about the possibility for the survey. Maybe we were lucky enough and we will have it done by the time, but I cannot promise you that. I cannot promise you more than I can do. But nevertheless, I think we're going to be able to define specific steps forward in line with the proposed, so to say, streams or pillars. Once again, my words of gratitude for this meeting. Thank you very much for sharing your feedback and your vision with us. This is absolutely crucial for our work to be as much productive as possible. And please keep in mind that this working group was initiated not just to tick the box and say the job is done. We can still tick the box whenever we want, but we want to be useful. We want that work to be of great use so that Ukraine gets what it needs and what it wants. If you want the Green Deal, we're going to work on the Green Deal. We're going to be looking for colleagues and experts who have enough expertise and tell you a bit about what kind of impact it's going to have on individuals or whatever, on small and medium enterprises, large businesses. Whatever you says, whatever you tell it is important, we're going to do that. The project to deliver on our promises and satisfy your needs as much as possible. We have a lot of plans for this working group. There can be study visits, of course, awareness building campaigns, maybe additional activities. We'll see what we can do together. Like I said, we're going to have 3 to 4 years to come. Over that time, a lot of things may change, of course, but let's hope that as of the end of this time, we will be very proud of the Ukraine's full-fledged EU membership. Maybe it works. So once again, my sincere gratitude to you, dear colleagues. Please, all the remarks, questions, proposals, whatever you have, we are ready to listen and be responsive to that. Thanks very, very much to our interpreter as well, Oleg. Thank you very much for your support for the today's meeting, and take care. See you next time. APD will be there. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. That's a brilliant meeting. Thank you very much for it.
Дякую.